Everybody ready?
It's snowing, so yeah.
We'll call this meeting of the Senate Finance Committee to order. Would ask the people to keep the noise down. Okay, then I'll talk till then. For the members of the Finance Committee, just, we did get a new update from February. I don't know whether everyone got it or whatever.
Yes.
But we all know the things that are coming up in front of us, so I do not intend to do a lot of execing of bills with appropriations that are considerable until we get closer to the end of the near crossover. I, can be convinced otherwise, but it'll take a little doing. And
Less we built. Wow, where is that?
it was just the sheet I got from the legislative people, budget. He sent it to me because I requested it, so.
Well, the people in the room learned that Senator and Assistant
All right. Our first bill is Senate Bill 395, and I ask the prime sponsor to come forward. I can. I know I'm being pushy. Senator, welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. For the record, my name is Sharon Carson, and I have the pleasure of representing Senate District 14, comprising of the towns of Auburn, Londonderry, and Hudson. And for this afternoon, I have for your consideration Senate Bill 395, which is relative to establishing the position of establishing the position of Assistant Commissioner of the Department of Agriculture, Markets, and Food. Mr. Chairman, there's a few points that I'd like to make concerning this legislation, and the commissioner is here to talk with all of you about the finer points of why this should happen. This bill does not fund the position of the assistant commissioner. Those funds were already in the budget. And due to an oversight on the part of the commissioner, no statutory language for the process of actually hiring the assistant was not submitted for inclusion in HB2. It wasn't until the department attempted to post the position that the oversight was caught by Human Resources. This bill follows standard procedures used by other agencies, and the language in the bill was taken directly from other current statutes. And finally, this position is in an immediate need, and the hope is that it can be fast-tracked so it can reach the governor's desk at the early opportunity. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee, for your time this afternoon. I appreciate it. And again, the commissioner is here to address any of the finer points and answer your questions.
Are there any questions from the committee for the prime sponsor?
No.
Seeing none, thank you. Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome, Commissioner.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I am Sean Jasper, Commissioner of the Department of Agriculture, Markets, and Food, and I'm here first of all to say I am sorry that you have to be here for this. This is one of those things that I think I should have known better, but never having established a position such as this, none of us in the department gave it any thought and didn't get caught through the process. And so I'm just very hopeful that you can help speed this along. It is a position that I've recognized the need for since I became commissioner, but never asked for it before because there were higher priorities. Finally got it, and I thought I was going to get some relief, and then found out what I'd done to myself. So all I can say is I'm sorry, and please and thank you.
Questions for the commissioner? Senator Del Sandro.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Walker. Commissioner, I've not seen this happen before in my tenure where we fund something and forget to do it. I mean, usually it's the other way around. You know, we do it but forget to fund it. So the first year's almost gone by, so I'll ask the LBA, what happens to the money that was appropriated for the first year?
Because agriculture is this is a generally funded position, whatever isn't spent on the position will lapse to the general fund at the end of the year.
Okay. So what you, if I'm interpreting what you said, the money that hasn't been spent for the first half year, all right, carries only to the end of this biennium, to the end of this fiscal year, it lapses at the end of this fiscal year, or does it wait until the biennium to lapse?
It would lapse at the end of the fiscal year because there was an amount in each fiscal year
Right.
for this position.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Additional questions for the commissioner? Seeing none, thank you very much, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Just, Grant, would you check, make sure there's nobody else signed up after I took the sheet?
There are no other signups.
Okay, in addition to who has testified, there are 2 people who have signed either here or online for support. And
So, I'm assuming, based on the testimony, that's why there's no FN?
correct.
Because there's no cost?
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
You save half of it. You save half of the money because after it is voted, we have the acquisition filled.
I like the sound of that. And we did forget other things. I mean, remember, Senator Birdsall's Hampstead payment, that got dropped too, so things happen. I understand that. I don't see any reason not to exec it, though.
No, I think we might as well.
I hear a motion to go into executive session.
So
Do I have a
moved.
second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second by Bradley and Ennis. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Do I have a motion?
Ought to pass.
I have a motion by Senator Ennis, seconded by Senator Pearl. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it.
Move to come out of executive session.
I have a motion and a second to come out of executive session. All those in favor say aye. Aye. We are out of executive session. And in about a minute, we'll be ready for the next one. And Senator Ennis will take over.
I did not know that. But did you not know that I was taking over?
But I got this.
Man, that tie is like so cool.
Thanks. Something to spruce up our gray day. It's all good.
And it's even well tied. You're an expert at tying bow ties? No kidding, because I wouldn't be able to do it. It's hard. Yeah.
There's one I know, it's too thick, I can't get it to pop through. It falls apart every time I'm pissed.
Okay, well, you done good with that.
I think we're at 110.
All right. I'd like to open the hearing on Senate Bill 453. And we have a gentle senator in front of us to introduce the bill.
Thank you. My name is James Gray. I'm the senator for District 6, which starts in Rochester, goes up Route 11 to Alton and Gilmanton. The bill in front of us today is Senate Bill 453, making appropriations statewide voter registration system. This is one of the backbones in our election integrity. It is where we register the people to vote. We do a lot of things in there. And one of the things that constituents have asked along with the other modifications they're doing and the upgrade that they're doing, is to be able to do things like change party affiliation, their last name if they get married, and other things. This, nor anything else, changes the statute about who is qualified to do that. It is still a local decision. It is the supervisor of the checklist. It is the town or city clerk that will be doing the investigation for these people who apply through the portal. But again, the portal is just one part of this, okay? We need that system, and if you look at line 1, the statewide voter registration system is what the acronym is. And we need that to be accurate. We need it to be up to date. The one that we have now has been in place for many, many years. I'm sure that some of the people behind me will testify to that. But we've actually, I believe that what we tried to put into the budget last time and took out before we passed the budget was $600,000. So we've reduced it, you know, even trying to hone those numbers down to just over $500,000. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions? Yes, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator. Senator, why isn't HAVA paying for this?
Certainly HAVA funds could be used for this, but right now in legislation that we've already passed, you know, many years before us, we are limited to spend a certain percentage of the HAVA funds. I believe it's 12%, but somebody behind me will correct that. But those funds right now, we pay for educating the various election officials out of that money that we take out of HAVA funds. We pay for the system that we're using for accessible voting, which we have gone through a couple of different iterations trying to make sure that it is accessible to all those people. And, you know, if you spend it all, then every year they have to come back for that new money. And I don't want to put at risk the training and other wonderful things that we're doing with that HAVA money right now by spending it down in some other manner.
Further question?
Yes, of course.
But indeed, if you spend all this money for training, which we do, and kudos to the Secretary of State's office for that effort, that they should be complimented for that. But indeed, if you're going to train everybody, you ought to have the mechanisms in place to provide the results of that training, and the results of that training would be a more efficient, effective process that's in place. And it seems to me that we should be sustaining that and spending some money on that. And the money from the HAVA money was appropriated for that. We want a just, fair election, but we want a well-educated public to participate in that election process. Isn't that what the HAVA money was for?
The HAVA money, if you look back in the statute, is for partly education and other things. So the Secretary of State is much more qualified to go into that, and I didn't look at the names on the list, but he's here, and I think you could request that he come up.
He has signed up. I think he might be next.
Right. Good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, any further questions? Thank you, Senator. Secretary Scanlon, Deputy Secretary Hennessy, welcome. Glad to have you this afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. I'm David Scanlon, Secretary of State. Trying to think of the best way to start, given the questions that I heard. When the Help America Vote Act passed in 2002, it required the states to engage in 5 areas. The first was to create a statewide centralized voter database and to maintain it. And we have done that. The second major component of that was to provide accessible voting equipment in every polling place so that individuals with disabilities could vote privately and independently. And I believe that we are on our 3rd generation of accessible voting equipment. And those voters can actually use a regular official ballot that is marked by a printer and cast their vote like anybody else. And then The third requirement was to do poll worker training. The fourth requirement was to educate the voters. And the fifth requirement of the Help America Vote Act was to provide funds for the Attorney General to enforce the provisions of the Help America Vote Act. When that fund was created and we received the initial amount of money, which was significant, I believe it was around $16 to $17 million, the legislature at the time said, let's spend what we need to spend to meet the mandates of the federal act, but then bank the rest of the money so that we can maintain the federal mandate as long as we can without having to dip into the general fund. And so the legislature said at the time that we could spend, I believe it was 1/20th of the money in that account in a year. That got changed over time where we could spend 1/12 of the funds in any given year. The bottom line is that we have, we hope to go live in April or May with a new statewide voter registration database, replacing the legacy system that we had. We've provided the accessible voting equipment and we're keeping that up to date. Our training program is very extensive, very efficient and very effective. And all of that money, all of those items are being paid for with that 1/12 of the funds that we can spend in a given year. We've been able to sustain a healthy balance in that fund for 20 years. And so that has been a successful program that has been well managed, and we've been able to maintain these programs with the HAVA funds because we have not spent down the original balance. If we start spending money on these one-time costs and not ignoring but slackening off of the training programs and things like that, eventually we will reach a point where we're going to have to start dipping into the general fund to pay for these really good programs as opposed to maintaining the balance of the federal funds like we have. So that's where we're at on that. Now, with the new statewide centralized voter database that is going to be going live, there is a lot more power and functionality to this database to where we can add on certain items like an election portal. And there was a debate in the House yesterday on the portal bill yesterday, which passed, but there seemed to be some question about just exactly what the portal does. So I would like to explain that, what my vision is of that for the committee. In statute now, we have processes in place about how a voter can register to vote, who they do that with, who's responsible for making those approvals, and how an absentee ballot is requested through the town clerk. My vision is that none of that would change with a portal. What the portal does will create efficiencies and accuracy in the database because it would allow voters that want to register to vote to pre-fill an electronic form with their required information that would then be sent electronically to the supervisors of the checklist so that they could review it in advance of any election and make sure that the information was accurate and that the voter could qualify to be put on the checklist. The voter would still have to show the required documentation or sign an affidavit and sign the registration form the first time that they either came to vote or had an interaction with the clerk or the supervisors at their office. So that part does not change in the statute. What that allows the supervisors of the checklist to do, however, is to simply take that electronic data once they've approved it and then transfer it to the electronic voter database with accurate information because it hasn't been transcribed 2 or 3 times before it gets entered into the database. And it would also shorten lines when voters are trying to register at the polling place because those forms have already been pre-filled. So that's the benefit that I see, and that's the request for the appropriation of funds. If the committee would like, I would be happy to entertain you up at the HAVA office, which is in the State Archives, where we have, I believe, 5 full-time staff up there that are paid for with these funds that maintain the database, keep track of the accessible voting equipment, program the ballots for the accessible system before every election, and things like that. And I think you would have an appreciation then for how involved and expensive that process is.
Okay.
Did you have anything you wanted to add?
All right. Please. And
I can answer questions.
okay, great. Are there questions for the Secretary or the Deputy Secretary? Yes, Senator Rosenwald.
I have a few questions, if I could. What is the current balance of the HAVA funds?
The current balance is, I'd say about a little over $14 million, but I would say that $1.5 million of that is encumbered through expenses that we've committed to. Yeah.
So it's pretty close to what we originally got.
Well, what we originally received, I think it was $16 to $17 million around 2004. And then we spent several $1 million on the statewide voter database and the accessible voting equipment. A period of time went by where there was no additional receipt of funds. More recently, Congress has appropriated funds for cybersecurity issues. There was $3 million that was given to the state to deal with conducting an election under COVID conditions. And all of that money went back to the cities and towns to help them with their elections. So in the more recent years, Congress has been willing to provide additional funding to pay for the Help America Vote Act. And I have said in the past hearings on this issue that to the extent that we receive funds from the federal government that are above and beyond what we need for the annual maintenance, that we would be willing to use that money for one-time costs for projects, just to keep that balance at a reasonable level.
Can I follow up?
Please.
Thank you. Does the $14 million make interest? So it should, if you're getting like 2% interest, put out about $300,000 a year.
That money earns interest. Prior to the last couple of years, it was not earning much interest.
Mm-hmm.
That money is invested through the state treasury, and we try and get the best return on that money. Right now, you might have more information.
5%. So you could actually pay for this using the interest.
Well,
Follow up.
Having that money comes in certainly helps us maintain the program. And as I mentioned, if we have funds above and beyond what we need to run the programs that we have, then we're certainly willing to use that on one-time projects.
Could I ask one more?
yes, please.
The disabled voter equipment that we were required to set up, is that equipment available for municipal elections as well as state elections to all cities and towns?
We would be happy to share that equipment for local elections, and it's easy to do with printers and other, I'll say, ancillary equipment. But when it comes to the tablets that are used for the voter to make their choices on, those all have to be reprogrammed for each election. We have concerns about lending them out because what might get put on those laptops that could impact an election down the road. But more importantly, it's the management of those devices, because elections in New Hampshire happen so frequently that it would be tough to let towns use them for local elections and then have to get them back erased, reprogrammed, and redistributed. It would be a lot less expensive, I think, if the towns would just purchase their own tablets and be responsible for their own programming. The other issue is that the ballots for towns at the local level are very different from one municipality to the next. Some towns that don't have SB2 may just have a straight ballot that has candidates on them. A ballot that has Senate Bill 2 articles on it is going to be a very involved process to program those tablets to deal with a situation like that. It's a logistical issue more than it is a willingness to try and help the towns out.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Please.
Thank you. Erin Hennessy, Deputy Secretary of State. I just want to add to the numbers piece. So as Secretary Scanlon mentioned, we are finishing up the new statewide voter registration system. That should be done hopefully in the spring. We still have many payments that are due on that. So I apologize for not bringing those numbers. I believe it's anywhere between 1.5 to 1.7. And then at the end of the warranty period, we owe 10% of the entire contract. In the summertime, we anticipate going out to bid, and we're still working through this process for the a new contract on the accessible voting equipment. So we can't estimate at this time what that cost would be.
All right, thank you. Senator Gray.
Just a clarification on some of the questions that the good senator asked. Since we're reducing the fund by 12% each biennium, and we would have to get 6% interest just to break even, and so at 5% we're actually losing money in the fund every year. Is that correct?
That's good math, sir.
They are an engineer.
That's correct, yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Senator Bradley.
Thank you. So I noticed that the appropriation is in FY25. If it were moved into FY24, could you have this up and running before the election?
I would want to ask the vendors that would do that, and I will do that and get back to you on it.
Okay.
All right. All right, any further questions for the Secretary or Deputy Secretary? All right, thank you both very much. Next on the list to speak is Bev Cotton. Good afternoon. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I appreciate.
Could you maybe state your name and town?
Yes,
Just to get
my
that-
name is Bev Cotton. I'm from Ware, New Hampshire. I am a volunteer with 4 nonpartisan groups and also a poll worker. All of the 4 groups that I work with can see the benefits of this portal in allowing for corrective action in addresses, requesting absentee ballots, and removing barriers that illness and disability can present. And the portal's not possible, obviously, without funding. Funding the portal will go to benefit the election process in so many ways, allowing for more accurate, up-to-date data within our voting systems. It's going to streamline the election day processing because folks can start that process online and then just bring their verification documents in with them to complete the process. It prevents labor-intensive manually maintained registration files, and it would not allow for missing information, which is a big part of the labor that our local election officials have to face in contacting folks to retrieve that missing information. It eliminates handling of paper, it eliminates some mailing costs, and the need for much data entry. Some additional benefits are realized through easy access to the registration information. Information portals can provide voters with easy access to information about voter registration deadlines, about polling locations, and other important election information. It also tends to increase voter participation. It allows folks the information that they need to make informed decisions. And it improves accuracy of voter information. Voter information portals can help ensure that the voter information's up to date, which can prevent fraud and other issues. The projected cost, I've done a lot of research because I've just been very interested in this topic over the past couple of years, and the project cost seems in line with what other states have spent. Costs vary widely depending on the full scope of the project. Some states choose to employ broader systems to fulfill other needs, but the cost savings to our towns and cities far outweigh these implementation dollars. It was estimated between 2014 and 2020 that the cost of paper-based registrations ran over $10 million, with a roughly $5 per form cost. So it seems that there are broad benefits to funding the portal for more current, accurate voter rolls and to decrease the burden on our local election officials and municipalities. Costs seem favorable in relation to the labor-saving benefits and the increase in the accuracy of voter data. I appreciate the efforts. Thank you for all the work that you've done with the voter information portal to bring this to fruition. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
coming. Are there any questions? Senator D'Alessandro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, thank you very much for coming. It's always good to hear from a public official who participates in the process. I don't think there's a question relating to the process. The question relates to the payment of the process. And we have two methods of payment that are before us at this time. We have a $14 million balance in the Haver account. We have $1.5 million encumbered from the account to pay for certain things that we have, we have designed to get. It makes a huge difference in the actual voting process. You pointed that out, and I think magnificently, and I appreciate that very much. The question is, how do we pay for it? And the fact of the matter is, we're allowed to gain interest on the money, and we have accrued more interest in this year in the state of New Hampshire than we've ever done before. $35 million in the first year of the biennium, $25 million for the second year of the biennium. So interest has been coming in at a fairly favorable rate. And it would seem to me the decision that has to be made here is, to use money that was given to us by the federal government to improve voting. And we've done that. We've done that. So do we make that decision, or do we go to the general fund in order to keep a fund in place that could gain interest, and we could use that interest money? That's the decision. It's basic, and it's a basic economic decision, because the policy is acceptable. It's perfectly acceptable. I think there isn't anybody here who would dispute that. So then you have to say, what's the best way to spend the money that we have? And the federal government produces the Help America Vote Act in order to do exactly what we're saying. They didn't say keep the money, but spend the money appropriately. And think of the improvements that have been made just in the last 50 years in the election process in New Hampshire. I ran for election 50 years ago. In 1972, I was elected to the House of Representatives when they counted ballots at night, under the cover of darkness, and many things happened. So things have really, really, really improved. So I think the improvement is magnificent. It's how we're going to pay for it. how we're gonna use these dollars, and we know dollars are scarce, right? We worry every day about how we're gonna spend that money. Do you agree with that? Am I
I
smoking?
understand what you're saying. I don't have the fiscal knowledge that Secretary Scanlon does
Yes.
about the HOPA funds and how they've been used historically and what kind of gains they've realized on those funds over time. I think Senator Gray made a good point that if we're earning 5% and we're spending 1/12 every 2 years, then it doesn't quite add up to a plus on that, and there would be a gradual reduction in that balance according to that logic. So I am not fiscally responsible for how the state pays for things, but my point is that in the big picture, it is hugely worthwhile from a financial standpoint, from the gains that we get by employing some functionality such as this, to the funds that our cities and towns are able to save in labor costs and such. So that's the relative point that I'm making in my statements.
My colleague from Nashua says that at a 5% interest rate, we would gain $750,000 a year
That's correct.
in interest.
Yeah,
That's not bad.
No, it's not. I'll mind that money for a year and give it all back.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for coming.
Just a point of
Really
order.
appreciate it.
We're kind of slipping into
Yes.
executive session information that we need to, so if we go, it would be
All right.
appreciated.
Thank you, senators. I think, all right, are there any further questions? Thank you. Appreciate your testimony very much. The last person signed up to speak is Martha May Emerson. Martha, please. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Chairman Gray, and the rest of the respected members on the committee for hearing my testimony. My name is Martha May Emerson.
Oh, yes, the mic. There's a little, there you go.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah. My name is Martha May Emerson. I'm from Concord, and I'm speaking in support of this bill. I'm very new to this, so I didn't understand exactly the process, and probably most of my prepared comments really relate to the bill that was passed yesterday, HB 463. So I'm kind of pivoting here a little bit, and I guess much of what I would have had to say in terms of support, reasons for supporting the election information portal have already been addressed by the previous speaker.
Okay.
But one thing that came to my mind as I was listening to this discussion is around how we use the funds to pay for this bill. There are 42 other states who have instituted an election information portal, and they have had to pay for it. So I wonder, just in terms of not trying to reinvent the wheel yourselves, if it might possibly be expeditious to explore how other states have explored that.
Okay, thank you.
So, thank you very much for taking my testimony, and this certainly is befitting that we make this move towards a better way of voter registration.
Are there any questions for Ms. Emerson? All right. Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it very much. There are three others who signed up in favor of the bill but are not speaking. Is there anyone?
And 33.
Oh, 33 support online and no opposed. Thank you, Senator.
Let me check to make sure.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak on Senate Bill 453?
All set, Senator.
Please.
Good afternoon. My name is Olivia Zink. I'm a voter in Franklin, New Hampshire, but the executive director of Open Democracy. And I just want to say that this election information portal would really help save local money at the local level. Our supervisors of the checklist and town clerks are hand entering this data. And I think it's really important that this efficiency is given back to our local communities to make sure people can enter this data. And especially when it comes to updating your voter registration, to be able to go down to the town clerk and change your party registration, it would be much easier if you could do that online, especially before a deadline, instead of having to go during the office hours of the town clerks. And in small communities, they're not open all the time. And I also want to just bring light that the state of Maine, when they implemented the portal, it cost a little over $200,000 for them to implement a portal. And I think our fiscal note might be closer to what the state of Maine is. And I also have testimony from Linda Bundy in Antrim, who works elections and does speak about the need to increase the efficiency for our local town supervisors of the checklist.
Any questions for Ms. Zink? All right, thank you. Oh, yes, Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. What was the difference between what Maine did and what's proposed here that would cause our cost to be more than double?
I think what Maine does is a whole online voter registration process. So they actually allow you to do the full registration, so you can do the digital signature and upload the documents. But I think that you could probably look at the fiscal note of Maine and their online information voter registrations policy and the difference between the portal. I think the portal in New Hampshire is still giving local control for the supervisors of the checklist and the town clerks to still go through the process we have in place now to register voters. So I think that's the distinction, but I do think that it might not cost the amount that's in this fiscal note. It might be less, as it was in the state of Maine.
Thank you. Any further questions? Senator Gray?
Just a point of clarification. If we look back 2 years when we did the other one, it was much more, had the ability to verify the person and the other things that were in there. And the cost estimate that we got from DOIT was considerably higher than what we've got here. So it all does go back to who was actually going to say, yes, Senator Ennis is the one who gave me this form, and I know Senator Ennis, and I'm saying he is qualified to vote. So if it's the clerk and the supervisor of the checklist as statute is now, then that is less expensive to implement electronically than if you're relying on that system, such as if you file your income tax here in New Hampshire for interest and dividends, okay, that, you know, we are verifying you, and that is much more expensive. So, comment on that?
Okay. Any further questions? Thank you, Olivia. Appreciate it. All right. Last call. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on Senate Bill 453? All right. With that, I will close the hearing with the egg. Yes, you know, it is what it is. All right.
Okay, the next bill that we have is Senate Bill 393, FN, relative to making appropriation to the Department of Environmental Services to fund drinking water infrastructure in Derry, and we'll welcome the prime sponsor to the hot seat. Good morning, Senator.
Good afternoon.
Close enough.
Good day.
It was a rough morning. I just thought it was still going on.
I didn't, you know, Senator Ennis said something, but for the record, I'm Senator Darrell Abbas. I represent Senate District 22, which is the communities of Pelham, Salem, Axon, and Plastow. And I'm here to introduce Senate Bill 393. And just to some clarification, because it says Derry, I was like, why is it going in Derry? This is phase 2 of the Southern New Hampshire Regional Water Pipeline. Phase 1 is complete, and a portion of phase 2 was kind of done simultaneously with phase 1, just out of pure common sense. A lot of the piping was already laid down. The exact amount that there's engineers here that will be able to speak more intelligibly on how much of that has been laid down. But the point I'm making is the concept of there wouldn't have been a phase 1 if you weren't going to do phase 2. This is just a continuation of that project. So this is really just to get that going. The recommendation of the potential options of how to continue with that, with phase 2, came out at the end of May of this year. In speaking on how the communities would benefit from that, I know Salem alone would receive an additional 1.2 million gallons of water per day, which is critical to that community's future. And I will say, thinking in at this moment in time, is there a water supply shortage in Salem? I would say no. That's under ideal circumstances, everything goes well, no problem. But what I can tell you, just the two main supply drinking water sources, Canopy Lake and Arlington Pond. This year, Arlington Pond, you couldn't even swim in the lake. It's normally a swim lake, even though it's used for drinking water. But you couldn't because of the cyanobacteria contamination. Normally, when we would switch water supplies for up until about the beginning of May, give or take, to the middle of October, generally speaking, is when they would feed off Canopy Lake, and then it switches to Arlington Pond. Well, they had to delay that because of the cyanobacteria contamination. However, that problem didn't make a big deal because of the heavy rainfall. Canopy Lake's water level was much higher. So we kind of got, I would say, lucky in that sense. But the problems on Arlington Pond don't seem like they would change anytime soon. That entire section of Salem, in Salem refer to that as North Salem. There's no municipal water or municipal sewer there. All the houses on the lake and in that neighborhood are all on septic, and it's well water. So much of any runoff in any part of that town is going to obviously contribute to potential contamination of that water supply. It's also a man-made lake. There's a lot of still water on that lake. It's a beautiful lake, but this summer was not as enjoyable. I just don't see that problem correcting itself anytime soon. Canopy Lake's it's a spring-fed lake. It's the water's much more windy in that part of that lake. I do live on that lake, so I'm very familiar with the water levels and how that works. But I'm just explaining that from a contamination perspective, that's the cyanobacteria problem you have. There's also the PFOAs. I know there's a lot of different versions of it. I just say PFAS, but when you're dealing with that, the EPA is anticipated will come out with a new standard that's supposed to come out in the end of December. It will come out now they're saying in sometime in February. The contamination measurement would be 4 parts per trillion. Both Canopy Lake and Arlington Pond would be considered contaminated under that standard as well. So you have a community with over 30,000 people living there that we can see it coming. We'll essentially have contaminated water supplies. I know my well, which is about give or take about 120 feet from Canopy Lake. When I first moved there, when we decided to start a family, we tested our well, thanks to a representative from Merrimack who taught me what PFAS was. And it came back at 11.8 parts per trillion. So we had to remediate our well. So and that was recommended, especially having young children. That was really the scare there. And I think that 4 parts per trillion measurement is what they recommend for infants, and that's why they're going to set that. But you have a community that could potentially see a problem in the future. Also, if there was a drought year, switching to Arlington Pond, Canopy Lake would run much lower. The water levels would go much lower than they should earlier in the season, which has happened. There's been times in the middle of August where people can't even get their boat out of the water. The water has become so shallow. Southern New Hampshire in general has grown tremendously. We led the way on developing housing. We're a very diverse economic community. We have over 450 mobile home units we have over 2,000 apartments. We have 300 more apartments scheduled to be built in the Tuscan Village project. There's also a new medical facility there. So we are really delivering on a lot of different opportunities that set New Hampshire in the right direction. However, we will run into a utility problem, but I will give my predecessor credit for recognizing that regardless of some of the development recently, this is what set us up for the future. It's not just Salem. This will service Windham, Hampstead, Plastow, and Atkinson would also benefit from this. Also, Manchester Waterworks, which is where the water would be coming from, they would make about $2.5 million per year off of this. So there's the pumping station, which is the majority of what this phase 2 would be. The pumping will be in Derry. Obviously, that comes with the price, so Derry would benefit from this as well. It really sets us up for a lot of future benefits in the community. I think there's a misconception that there's not low-income residents living in those communities. That's just a misconception and a stereotype. Trust me, I've grown up in Salem. I lived there the majority of my life. And there's plenty of people there that struggle day in and day out. And if they ever had to pay to get their well remediated, I'm not sure they would have the money to do it. And you run into some problems there. Whether it meets the EPA standard or not, if they have young children, you don't really want to be weighing the risk reward of that. So I was in a position where I was able to do that, but I do feel for the families who can't. What I would also point out is when it comes to the remediation of the wells, it's not that simple. You have to pay to get it tested. The testing alone was $500. North Salem, just to understand, if we ever wanted to put them on municipal water and municipal sewer, there is actually an insufficient water supply to do that, which I believe would help deal with the contamination issues on Arlington Pond. In respect to Canby Lake, all the Salem residents, one half of the lake is in the town of Windham, so we obviously can't control what they do. But in Salem, all of the residents on the lake are now on town sewer or town water. I think the only street that doesn't have town water is my street, but we still have municipal sewer, and that was all done in the last, I want to say give or take, about in the last 10 years. So we've done everything we can to preserve that lake from getting contaminated. However, this pipeline would really put us into the future. It wouldn't have made sense to do phase 1 if you're not going to do phase 2. Now's the time to do it. So there may be some additional funding that can become available depending on when that EPA regulation comes out. So we're still trying to put all that together. So I would ask some time for me to maybe put an amendment together. I did speak with some elected officials in Manchester too. There is some issues of potentially raising the lake level there. That I'm not sure if that would go in this bill or not, but that's being discussed. Not that there's any phase 3 put together, but if there was a phase 3, raising that lake level would be a big part of that. So I will say before I take any questions, I'm not an expert on water or engineering major water projects, so I did my best to explain this, but I'll more than happy to take any questions.
I'm going to start off. The question first for you would be a detailed estimate on the 20 million, okay? Certainly in there may be things that we'd like to fund, things that we don't want to fund. So a detailed breakdown, I don't know whether you're going to give us that or someone who provided you the $20 million, but I would like that for the executive session. Is that possible?
Are you asking for like an itemization of where the money would go in each, basically like a line-by-line item?
The department says that they are going to answer up for that when they come up. But the reason for it is that if it's the water line that goes through Derry, and serves the other communities, certainly we provided $9.7 million in the last budget to do that. And so, again, I'm trying to understand what is internal to Derry and what is, in Derry for the benefit of other people. So, Senator D'Alessandro has the question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, thanks for bringing this forward. I know how important it is. I was president of the Manchester Waterworks, so I have a little bit of knowledge about the waterworks situation. We provide 3 billion gallons a day, Manchester does, to to Derry, Kingston, and on down the line, right? 3 million a day at the same cost that the Manchester water payers pay, right? And I believe that there's a 5-year commitment to do that with the ability to restructure that arrangement. So this arrangement that we're talking about now, what does it do to that existing water structure? Does it expand it? I mean, because most of that's gravity fed, as I understand it, right? Do we need pumping stations? What do we need in order to make this happen? 25 million is a lot of money. We did spend 17, but it was gravity fed. We do 3 million gallons a day south, which has really helped the area that was depressed. And what else must be done what's going to be done for the 25 million that's going to make the difference?
The overwhelming majority is the actual pumping station, and that's what my understanding. That's what's going to go in Derry. There's more to it than that, but that is the biggest price tag. But it's one of those projects where if you just do one part of it, and then it gets stale, you don't want to have a project that's underfunded, especially when you're dealing with this amount. I know that there's potential money through the Southern New Hampshire Water Commission, and that has to go before that commission. If there was an amendment put together, I would put some contingency on that also being approved through there, especially because we will have what it appears to be contamination issues.
Sure, but with reference directly to Senator Gray's question, unless you know exactly what's going to happen here, it's very tough to make a decision on a financial commitment. Because as I say, we did something is in place. There was a 17 or $18 million expenditure that extended that water line. The towns committed, they built the towers, right? They built the big containment vessels to keep the pressure up. So what's in this, and how's it going to be laid out? I think that's very important as we look.
I will see to it that is provided to the committee before any executive session. I think it's a reasonable request.
Okay, thank you.
From behind you, Senator, the commissioner has already said that he's going to speak to that when he gets up on the...
I was hoping he would back clean up.
So. All right. Senator.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm really glad I've never sat on the Science Committee. So I only have to think about money. But my question is, since you knew Phase 2 was going to follow Phase 1, why was this not presented during the budget as up to fiscal year 25 appropriation when we could have considered it, given our giant surplus and all the other things? Or have you alternatively considered funding it from the Drinking Water and Groundwater Trust Fund, which has $188 million in it?
So my goal was for this to find its way into the budget in HB2, but the report came out towards the end of May, and given everything that was going on with the budget, to bring in a major expenditure like this at the 11th hour, I thought would have been irresponsible. To kind of get everyone together. So in the interest of the overwhelming majority of the state and everything going on with that 800-page piece of legislation, I decided it wasn't the best time to do that, given the short time frame. In respect to the trust fund you mentioned, considering some of the contamination issues, yes, there could be potential for funds available there. Any amendment, I would probably put contingent on getting a percentage of the money from the trust fund. It's just a matter of putting it, we're kind of getting money from a lot of different directions, so it's kind of putting it all together. But that would be one of the sources. But that's more something that I would say when you bring it forward, I think waiting for that EPA standard to come out, having both water supplies in a large community like Salem, I think Salem is the 7th largest community in the state. To have both of your major water supplies to be deemed contaminated is problematic. Under Phase 1, Salem's getting 300,000 gallons per day. This is an additional 1.2. But my understanding, the town demand is give or take around 3.5 to 3.8 million a day. So even with Phase 2, the town would struggle. But without that, it really puts a community up against the wall.
Yes, ma'am.
So am I hearing that you'd be open to looking at other sources of funds than a $25 million general fund appropriation?
Wherever that bucket's available, to
Okay.
me, I think it's important. I don't think having one expenditure, from the general fund is the way this is going to work out. But at the same time, if a portion of it comes from the general fund, this is something that is critical. And waiting on this is one of those things where, if we don't deal with it now, I can see a problem in the future. This is something we can see coming, so I think it's very important to be proactive.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Thank you very much. Commissioner?
Thank you.
You have yourself and Mike with you. Oh, and for taking out the bill, we exact. Anytime I forget, you put me down.
Mr. Chair, Senators, thank you. For the record, my name is Bob Scott. I'm Commissioner with the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. I have with me Mike Unger, who is smarter than me, so that's why I brought him. So he's the lead engineer for this and many other projects that we have going on. So just briefly, I know the Senator did a good job in introducing this. So the issue that was being addressed with phase one, if you will, of the Southern New Hampshire Regional Project, and I will say this is an unprecedented project for drinking water in New Hampshire, that we have all these communities involved. We have Manchester Water Works, Pennachuck, Hampstead Area Water Company. We have all different water companies involved. So this is what we have so far is akin to synchronized swimming. A lot of people working together to try to get good things to happen. And the reason why this was twofold, as the Senator mentioned, is water supply and water quality issues in the Southern New Hampshire sector. There are multiple communities involved, as I mentioned. And as the Senator mentioned too, we've been grappling as an agency and a state with the PFAS issue. EPA, as the Senator Abbas mentioned, is poised to lower that standard more stringent. We're currently at 12 parts per trillion. They're given every indication it'll be 4 parts per trillion, which will put especially the Southern New Hampshire part of the state really at risk. So we're going to see a lot more private wells and a lot more water supplies above that standard. So we're kind of poised for that. And this would help a lot in that. So just to give you some background for the phase one, as the Senator mentioned, goes through those existing communities, ultimately to Plastow, and it could go beyond. And it was built, as you mentioned, we upsized anytime possible. The mantra was, we're not going to put pipe in today to dig it up tomorrow to put a larger pipe in. So we built it for 3.13 million gallons per day. It's only flowing right now 1 million gallons per day. That original project was on the order of $47 million, the whole thing for phase one. It's important to point out, I just want to clarify, phase two, what we're talking about, which is increasing the capacity, which is pumping, tanks for pressure, all the accoutrements that go with that, is not just in dairy, and the total cost is a little over $37.6 million. So the ask in this bill is $25 million for the plant to be upgraded in dairy, but as part of a larger project. So my understanding from the original intent was the legislative ask is for $25 million. The other $13 million would come from the communities, the Drinking Water Groundwater Trust Fund, and trying to find other sources of money. So that was the intent, as I understand it. To Senator D'Alessandro's question, for where we are, what this would do to the lay of the land, I know you're aware for the existing 3.13 million gallons, the capacity, which is MSDC for Manchester, has already been purchased. So that's kind of been reserved. But Mike will be able to provide, again, as we mentioned, for the executive session, a listing. He's handed out a one-pager that's attached to the testimony letter that outlines to some extent the details of what you're asking for, I think, but we can provide more for that if you want also. So with that, I could go on, but I know there's a lot of other people that signed up, and I'm trying to remember the other questions that were asked. I want to make sure we answer those.
Senator Bradley.
Thank you. Of the $47 million in phase one, how much of that was out of the drinking water trust?
I'm going to defer, see if Mike knows here.
So it was 32 million from the trust fund and a little over 10 million from MTBE settlement funds, and then the rest from local contribution.
So about 2/3 of it was drinking water trust fund?
Yeah.
Okay. So if this is 37 million, could the drinking water trust fund assume, you know, the same type of percentage that we had for phase one, which would bring the cost down by, I don't know, 10 or 12 million dollars, a general fund cost?
I think certainly possible. So somebody mentioned, I think maybe Senator Rosenwald, that the 188 million being in the trust fund. I believe we're closer to 100 million now that's unobligated in the trust fund. So that's really becomes the question is how much can the trust fund bear and keep a trust fund? And
Yeah,
so,
I mean, I get that too.
Yeah.
Thank you, Senator Gray. Follow up. Yeah. Was there any general fund money in phase one?
I do not believe so.
Okay.
If I could, I was trying to listen in the background before to answer questions. So Senator Gray, I think you mentioned the 9.7 million from last year, the water crossing. That had to do with Pennachuck water, and that was in a different location and not going to feed the same areas directly. It's important, and we're working on that with Hudson, among others, right now.
Senator Rosenwald, you've had a question.
I do. I actually have two questions. Would it be possible to split this appropriation over two budgets? So it's a $25 million ask for next fiscal year. Would it slow down development or purchasing a lot if some of it was paid for in this biennium and some was paid in the next budget?
I think that's practical and possible. I don't know. Well, we'd have to manage it, and we do anyways. So again, I talk about the synchronized swimming. We're kind of ultimately have become not the general contractor, but we're watching all this. So we'd have to just pay attention to how that would lay out. So again, our goal is never to spend money that we have to then undo, if you will, and waste money. But I think that's possible.
Thank you. Would you be able to tell us how you would split it out? And my other question is, do you have any sense of what the impact of this new structure would be on the utility property tax? Because that would bring some money in, right?
Right. So no, I don't. I'm trying to think. The utilities that would be involved, I guess, would be Manchester Water Works, Pennachuck, and Hampstead Area Water Company. But I don't know that.
All right. So it's a question for DRA. Thanks. But you could tell us if you were going to split it out.
Yes. Yeah, we could give you a guesstimate of how we would do that if we, depending on, again, it depends on what the split would be.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
D'Alessandro, you had a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As it exists today, the trust, didn't we loan $5 billion from the trust to Pennachuck to expand the lines in Merrimack? Or did we loan? I know there was a loan of X, and I thought it was $5 billion.
Yeah.
It's at a very low interest rate. So, is that true? And will that be coming back to
Yes.
the trust?
So I don't remember the exact amounts either. So there are different things. Like for instance, Pennachuck put another water intake to help get more water out of the Merrimack River for the the expansion due to the St. Cobain issue for PFAS. So generally speaking, as you were alluding to, the trust fund does two things, grants and loans. We try to do more loans than grants, so we get the money back and can rejuvenate it, yes.
Right. Okay, so I guess the question would be, how many loans do we have out there that will be paying back money to us to restore the trust? You know, at least for some, in some, I think that's an important consideration if you're thinking about pushing more money out the door.
Right, right.
If we could get that information, that would be important. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Bradley, I saw you reaching for your button earlier.
Yeah, so, I think this has to happen. I agree with Senator Rosenwald. If we can phase it in over FY '25 and FY '26, that would be a good thing. I would like to see an agreement the way the Groundwater Trust Fund has with the communities to actually have a commitment for, you know, whatever percentage of that money is going to come in. I mean, that's the way applications come before the Groundwater Trust Fund. That'd be pretty helpful too. So that's just my view.
Additional questions? Okay, thank you very much. The only other person who signed up to speak is Roy E. Sorensen.
Good afternoon. For the record, Roy Sorensen.
Hit the button until you get a red light.
Sorry,
Right.
is that better?
Yes.
So good afternoon. For the record, Roy Sorensen, Municipal Services Director for the town of Salem. I will debate Commissioner Scott on the general contractor for the regional water project, because I do believe that's the town of Salem, actually. The reason I say that, a little bit on the regional water project, so I became the Municipal Services Director in Salem, also a resident. I've lived there for 20 years. So I understood the challenges of water in the community. In 2016, upon taking my position, there's a lot of things happening in Salem, and in particular in the area as well. And by the way, PFOS and PFAS, it wasn't even on the radar yet. I met with DES, and we talked about this potential regional water project, which to me, working in Massachusetts previously, and as part of the Massachusetts Water Resource Authority, it seemed to just be pie in the sky. And then then Senate President, I spoke to him, Chuck Morse at the time, and we looked at it. We sat with DES, we sat with the other communities, and the project became real. Outstanding project for Southern New Hampshire, obviously, as it helps serve water, potable drinking water from Manchester to the southern tier towns. Just as an example, the water comes through Derry, goes through the town of Wyndham to Salem, off to our northwest quadrant over to Hampstead, Atkinson, and those communities ultimately in Plastow. All of those communities at the time were affected by MTBE contamination, and that was the premise of the project. As I mentioned, you now talk about PFOS and PFAS. We certainly have concerns there, particularly if that 4 parts per trillion is passed as a regulation. I think a lot of communities are going to have issues with that. So that's just for the future. But some of the stuff Salem had to do as part of this project, we took over a portion of Wyndham. We actually are the water supplier in Wyndham. So that's very unique for a public utility in the state of New Hampshire, or even nationwide for that matter. We built that 20-inch water main, helped design it, and made sure the project was executed. We had to work with DES, DOT, obviously the town of Wyndham, to get that project done. And it's important to mention, I think, and it did come up, whether it was Commissioner Scott and even Senator Abbas, the infrastructure that was put in place in the town of Wyndham, it is built for 3.3 million gallons a day. It's probably built for more than that. The project itself was based off of that premise of water. Certainly can handle more than that. We also put in a PRV station and booster station, pressure reduction valve station, and chemical treatment station. That's actually on the Derry and Wyndham town line, but we oversee that. We handle that. residents in Wyndham are our customers. In fact, Pennachuck's actually one of our customers as well. We sell water to Pennachuck via this regional water project. So currently, we have intermunicipal agreements with the Southern New Hampshire Regional Water Line. We have an intermunicipal agreement with the town of Wyndham, and we also have an agreement with Pennachuck as well. So we have done quite a bit from Salem, and I must say, I haven't bothered Commissioner Scott lately to remind him about what we have put in here, because I think Salem was a big part of this project. Our system was already built out, so we had 16-inch water pipes in line. We were just going to be the community that wheeled that water. And we bought into that project. Our community bought into it, in that the voters secured the money for Phase 1 and Phase 2 allocation for the MSDC for the city of Manchester. So, and obviously we have, as Senator Abbas mentioned, a northern tier of Salem that we are not providing water to right now. We have a master plan that's built out, and the regional water line will help us serve those residents. I will say you probably, and we have gotten calls from residents up in northern Salem concerned with the PFOS and PFAS contamination levels as well. As we have done a lot, and the other thing too is that the system is built, and we want to be able to ensure that the flow that comes through there is proper, that it's moving water, it's getting to the other communities. If you don't do that, you're actually going a little bit backwards, right? You're going to start having some water quality issues. We actually were challenged with that a little bit at the beginning of the project, but we've been fortunate now that the other communities are taking on more water. So from our standpoint, we were thrilled with the project on paper. As I mentioned, it appeared to be pie in the sky. It's actually been built. The first phase is built. Salem's system is set. The stations are in place. This allocation certainly will help out the town of Derry as far as their system is, but that will be able to provide that additional flow to Salem, which ultimately wheels it to these other communities. I don't want to speak on Wyndham's behalf, but we do serve water to Wyndham. I believe they do have significant contamination on their own in portions of Wyndham as well, with PFOS and PFAS. So looking ahead, obviously, Salem being able to provide that water, we do a lot. We've taken that responsibility on. So I think sometimes my utilities manager, Fred Wallace, who's here today in the audience, he does a fantastic job, by the way, because we also have the ability to regulate flows that come over the town line. So he's constantly analyzing the flows, the chemicals, and things of that nature of what's happening. And at times he said to me, "Why did we do this again?" Just to give him a headache. But he's very good at his job and in general. So that's it. That's all I have to present. I want to thank the committee for hearing us, and hopefully you will help us support this and fund that next phase of this water line.
Thank you. Are there any questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
On my list, there is approximately 11 people who have signed up in support. There's 3 more people online. No one else indicated that they were speaking. Certainly, if you heard the committee members, it's not whether or not we would like to fund this. That is not the issue. So if somebody thinks that they absolutely need to talk to us, you speak now or forever hold your peace, I guess. All right, seeing none, we will close the public hearing. And we're going to take a 5-minute break because I need to come back. We are going to take up Senate Bill 394 relative to the Cyanobacteria Mitigation Loan and Grant Fund. Welcome the prime sponsor, and take note that the online sign-up for people in support was 301 to 0. So, Senator Bradley?
Well, and I would note that Abbas's bill cost $25 million. Yours cost $550,000, and mine's $1 million. So I'm kind of on the gray side of things. And that's not a bad place to be. So, for the record, Jeb Bradley, Senate District 3. As you all recall, we put $1 million into the Cyanobacteria Fund last year at the end of the budget process. As we were trying to pull everything together, it's what this committee deemed we could do. The request of the various Lakes Association had been $2 million. I'm not going to stand here and say that $2 million is likely to be enough, but it's certainly in line with the request that we got last year. And I think given, our budget situation, like your bill, Senator Gray, we should be able to afford it. There is no question that cyanobacteria is a huge issue in our bodies of water across the state. I live on a small lake. Last summer, it did not have a cyanobacteria bloom. The summer before it did. Some areas of my pond were pretty difficult for people to swim and boat. In front of my house, it was not really pleasant, and then it did disappear. But I put the appropriation to include, and if I don't pronounce the lake in Moultonborough,
Got a few emails on that.
Canastaka properly, I apologize. Because I was contacted by property owners on that lake. And I think that, I hope Commissioner Scott is here, or has he left? Oh, too bad. I think DES would agree that this is one of the top priority lakes for remediation. Certainly my conversations with him is that that is the case. I know it, in talking to you, Mr. Chairman, you were a little bit leery of naming a particular lake, but I think given the testimony you're likely to hear, this lake really is deserving without question. I think we've all gotten a packet of emails, and this is one that we've all gotten, of a picture of the bacteria, and I'll let it go around. There you go. That was pretty good. I got it right to you. You got to look at it, though. You got to look at it. See, I mean, it is so strong in that lake. It makes swimming and boating nearly impossible. And that's why so many people have contacted all of us. They contacted me. They've worked with DES to make sure that with $1 million we allocated, that they are at the front of the line. I just want to take out an insurance policy to make sure it actually happens, and that we appropriate the additional money so that other lakes that need the money but maybe are not at the same level of bloom as Canastaka are able to access that fund. So pretty simple bill, and I hope that we pass it.
Thank you, Senator. Are there questions from committee members? Since Senator Bradley and I have talked about this bill outside of this, I'm not going to repeat any of the questions for him. We'll take care of those as we go through the rest of the process. And so thank you, Senator, and we'll go on to, there's only 4 people that have signed up to speak. Norm Royce. New Hampshire Lakes is the closest.
Yeah, okay.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Norm Royce. I'm a resident of Northwood, New Hampshire. I live on Northwood Lake. I'm the president of the Northwood Lake Watershed Association. I'm also an elected member of the Town of Northwood's Budget Committee, so I understand the significance of appropriating funds to important initiatives. Cyanobacteria blooms reached a historic level in 2023 across New Hampshire. Northwood Lake experienced 4 blooms, with the first occurring in June and the last in September. Not an easy summer for the many residents and visitors trying to enjoy a summer day at the lake. The impact of climate change is being seen with our weather patterns, floods, droughts, lack of snow, shorter winter freeze. These changes are having far-reaching impacts, including the quality of the water in our lakes and rivers. This funding request is essential to assist those dealing with the cyanobacteria problem. At Northwood Lake, we have historically had an issue with aquatic invasive species. When the Northwood Lake Watershed Association was formed 30 years ago, you could barely swim in the lake without having weeds hanging all over you as you exited the lake. But working closely with New Hampshire DES and New Hampshire Lakes, we were able to implement plans and actions to mitigate milfoil, and I'm glad to say we have very, very little milfoil today in Northwood Lake as a result. The Northwood Lake Watershed Association is now working on identifying root cause to implement corrective and preventive actions to mitigate cyanobacteria blooms. We are generating a watershed management plan to have a structured approach for that work. Our expectations are that septic systems and shoreline buffers will require rework and replacement to reduce the runoff into the lake, fueling the cyanobacteria. It's good to know that our residents will have an avenue to pursue funding assistance for this work. Please consider supporting the critical funding needed. I appreciate the opportunity to share my concerns, and thank you for the role you play in protecting New Hampshire's valued resources.
Thank you, Norm. Are there any questions from the committee members?
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. New Hampshire Lakes, Andrea Amarcu.
Very close.
Hey, you got an EAX in the end, so
No
I
worries.
did my best.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you, Chairman and Committee. I am grateful for this opportunity to testify. I'm Andrea Lamoureux, the President of New Hampshire Lakes. I'm here to testify in support of the bill. For those of you who don't know us, we are a statewide nonprofit organization. Our mission is to restore and preserve the health of all of our 1,000 lakes. Currently, we represent about 275 local lake associations and thousands of folks around the state that are connected to lakes in one way or another. I'm not going to spend a lot of time filling you in on the things you already know about this bill and the urgent problem of cyanobacteria, and it was interesting to hear the hearing before us, which highlighted the issue we're having with cyanobacteria in our drinking water. What I did want to share with you today is I sat on the advisory committee that worked with DES to develop the plan to address cyanobacteria in the state of New Hampshire. That plan was published this past November, and we have a couple people from DES here in the audience today that were pulled that plan together. Coming up with funding sources to support and enable local community groups to take action in their own communities to mitigate and reduce the causes of these toxic blooms is consistent with that plan, consistent with priorities of that plan. And we know that we have this mitigation fund established by the legislature last year and an initial appropriation. And once that program comes up and running, we know that that funding is going to be put to good use, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. There are a lot of other good projects out there that hardworking communities have identified and are willing to step up and do with support. And those include a very critical project at Lake Canesaca, which I know you'll hear more about. And there's about 50 or 60 other lakes throughout the state that have experienced these blooms with communities who are already rolling up their sleeves. And the faster we can help support those groups to get this good work done, we're going to provide more protection to our water supplies, to our economy, to everyone who loves to swim and enjoy the lakes. So I urge you to support this bill, and thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Senator.
I think there are some states that are looking at or have actually enacted requirements that septic systems be upgraded at the time of sale. Is that something your association is thinking about?
Thank you, Senator, for the great question. And you must have ESP. Yes, that is one of our primary interests, and there happens to be some legislation proposed this session relative to that topic and septic systems in general. So yes, that is something that New Hampshire Lakes hopes to work with other stakeholder groups and business to try to make some headway in this session and going forward. Thank you.
Senator D'Alessandro.
You do. She has ESP. There's no,
We
there's
all
no
have
question
ESP.
about it. It was a mind melt. That's what it was. How first of all, thanks for coming.
Sure.
Appreciate it. I've been on this case for a long time, abating aquatic vascular plants that are destroying our lakes. And in the old days, we used to use Silvex, but Silvex was ruled out by pesticide control. And then we tried harvesting. Do you remember those days when we used to hire harvesters to come in
Yes.
and harvest the lakes? And that went out. And then we had the divers go down and actually pull the roots. So we've tried numerous methodologies. What's going to save us in this particular instance? How are we going to use this $1 million to abate this terrible problem that we have?
Great. Thank you for the good question. And yes, our management plans for exotic invasive species has evolved over time as we've learned more, for sure. Great question. And this $1 million is allocated to go out to community groups to do projects. And I know that you'll learn more about the Kanasaka project, which is going to be an in-lake treatment using a product called alum to sort of render any nutrients that are on the bottom of the lake inactive, so it's not contributing to ongoing blooms. There's also another bill in the legislature this session that would enable DES to set up a cyanobacteria program to really do these in-lake treatments.
One further question, Mr. Chairman. In people who treat their lawns, the nitrogen from the treatment of the lawns flows into the lakes and actually enhances all of these growths to take place. So you've got septic systems that are problematic. You got lawn treatment that's problematic with the nitrogen flowing off. Everybody wants a green lawn, right? They want it to be nice and green all the time. That's problematic.
Yes.
That has to be dealt with. And these are all costs that have to be. They've got to be taken care of. If this is going to be successful, that's what we want. We'd like to see success. I think. Are there plans to deal with all of that?
Great question, and I'm excited to see there are a number of bills in the legislature dealing with a variety of issues that are potential sources to cyanobacteria. There is a fertilizer bill in this legislative session, and a couple of bills dealing with this Shoreline Water Quality Protection Act. So there are a handful of bills that we're really thrilled to see that this legislature has a huge potential to really start getting at a number of different causes, which would then help any projects that are funded by this money to be successful.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Additional questions?
Yes. If I might. So I have several lakes in my district that are affected by this, and I'm supportive of this. Sunapee, the area around that lake, there's some restrictions being proposed around septic systems, as noted by Senator Rosenwald. I'm concerned that we're just kind of painting over this issue and not really getting at the heart of it, though I hear the other bills might do that. Mm-hmm. But, a year and a half ago, we had a big problem with this in a drought year. It was also quite warm. This year, the problem was significantly diminished. It was not drought, and it was quite cool. So if we're going to really attack the factors that cause these blooms, it's septic systems, it's the runoff that Senator D'Alessandro noted with nitrogen and so on. Phosphorus, I assume. What else contributes to it, and what else can we do?
Great question. Thank you, Senator. Yes, as we are all realizing, there are a number of contributors to cyanobacteria blooms, some in our control and some really, frankly, out of our control, our crazy weather, right? Yeah. So we can do this regulatory approaches to put in, more protective laws and ordinances. but then also voluntary programs as well. At New Hampshire Lakes, we run a statewide program called Lake Smart, where we are working with residents around lakes for them to take voluntary action to reduce their contribution to these blooms, replacing septic systems, fertilizer, stabilizing their properties. So it's going to take a number of tools in the toolbox, so to speak, to really get at this problem in the long run. Lake-friendly governance, lake-friendly municipal ordinances, and property owners, taking initiative on their own to be lake-friendly.
I don't know, it just seems to me, not to move into executive session issues, but it seems to me we've got to come at this in multiple ways, and we've got to be aggressive.
Completely agree.
I don't want to just keep throwing money at mitigating a problem. I want to solve it at the source.
Right. At heart, I'm an aquatic biologist, and I want to address all the sources first before I, fix, do something. I don't want to just put a Band-Aid on things, and I'm glad that we're all in agreement there.
Thank you.
Seeing no additional questions, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Abigail Adams?
The light's on, so I think I'm on.
Yes, ma'am.
My name is, for the record, first of all, good afternoon. My name is Abigail Adams, and I'm speaking in favor of SB 394. I'm a resident and a taxpayer of Wolfboro, New Hampshire. My husband, Brian Hennessy, is here with me, and so are two residents of Alton, New Hampshire, and for brevity, they asked that I speak. And it's going to be quick, because I think you're all won over, really. Our concern is for the quality of our waters, and we echo all the views we've heard today, that the biggest threat to our tourist economy, and therefore our tax base, property values, is recurrent cyanobacteria blooms in our lakes. And we know that New Hampshire has faced the greatest number of cyanobacteria blooms in its history in the last 2 years. And I agree with all of you, it's time to really start to treat this aggressively. And I do think it's going to take a combination of mitigation, but also public education, because it's not one point source. A lot of individuals in the watershed will have to take responsibility. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, questions from the committee members? Seeing none, thank you. And the last one that signs up is Deborah Kelly, and I'm going to let you say the last name.
Sandra Kelly?
Okay, could be. Hey, I did my best.
Sorry,
From Guilford.
I scribbled, I guess. Good
Wow.
afternoon, esteemed members of the committee. My name is Sandra Kelly, 68 Glidden Road in Moulton Borough. I'm a retired oncology nurse practitioner, current chair of the Moulton Borough Planning Board, liaison to the Conservation Commission, and I have been involved in water testing on Lake Canasatka for almost 35 years. As development has changed the face of our state's shorelands with deforestation, building larger and closer to the water, landscaping and fertilizing, boating with bigger and more wake-producing watercraft, the water quality has diminished. Lakes are a naturally aging phenomenon, but our New Hampshire lakes have aged at a rate of more than 100 years in the past 10. After Lake Canasatka experienced its first cyanobacteria bloom, I spoke at town meeting saying this was the canary in the coal mine, that it was not a matter of if, but when these blooms would affect the other lakes in Moulton Borough. Sadly, this has proven true with blooms in multiple areas of Lake Winnipesaukee, Lee's Pond, and widespread and sustained blooms in Lake Canasatka. My husband photographed green slime on the ice less than 2 weeks ago. Watershed management plans for lakes in Moulton Borough have illustrated many areas requiring mitigation. Speaking specifically about Lake Canasatka, I am proud to tell you that neighbors, friends, and families have hoisted shovels, picks, and cleared swales, culverts, and added water raisers on paths and driveways in efforts to minimize the flow of external phosphorus into Canasatka. These lakes have been noted, these efforts have been noted and recognized as extraordinary stewardship by FB Environmental, DES, New Hampshire Lakes, and the Lake Winnipesaukee Association. However, it's not enough to halt the effects of warmer winters, shortening ice coverage, which you've heard. Sometimes it becomes necessary to encapsulate the phosphorus while minimizing external phosphorus from entering the lake. The lakes of New Hampshire are a precious resource. We must remain vigilant to protect this resource and the populace who enjoy the waters of our lakes. Many of our local businesses thrive or perish depending on the quality of water in which their customers play. I'm here to ask for your support for Senate Bill 394, and I thank you.
Thank you. Questions from this committee?
Now you know how to say Kanasatka.
Okay. But how long will I remember? That's the question. Okay, that is everyone that has signed up to speak. Yes, ma'am?
My name is Deborah Kelly Milburn, and
You're probably the one I stole your spot.
You did a great job. I just want
You have to sit down and
very quickly.
You have to sit down and introduce yourself and your town.
I will. Okay, for the record, my name is Deborah Kelly Milburn. I'm 75 years old, and I've spent every summer of my life on Winnipesaukee, and I'm very fortunate to own a cottage on Welch Island. Most of the previous speakers have said some of what I was going to say, so I'm just going to say that we have a cottage that's over 100 years old. It has a very poor septic system, and my husband and I are retired now, and we can't afford to replace it. It would cost probably $60,000 to replace our septic system on an island. So I urge you to approve this appropriation in hopes that perhaps we would get some help to fix our septic system and do everything we can to ameliorate this very serious problem. And also just to emphasize that unlike invasive species, which are certainly a problem, this is a very serious health issue. And there are many people on the islands who still drink lake water, and at times they boil it to take the bacteria out. And if you boil water with cyanobacteria, it makes it worse. Water filtration systems don't take it out. So this is really a serious health issue that when the public becomes more aware of it, it is going to could be catastrophic for the state's economy. So I just wanted to add my voice to thank you for what you're doing, and please don't delay on this. It's potentially really, really serious.
Okay, questions from the committee members? If not, thank you very much. After I close the hearing, ma'am, would you come up and identify which one is used on this list after I close the hearing? Okay? Anyone else? Seeing none, the hearing is closed. We'll get you up here, and then we'll see if any of the senators have other remarks. Is that you?
It's me, I'm so sorry.
Okay, Sandra.
Oh,
Kelly.
and I forgot to double check my.
All right. Thank you. We'll give it to the clerk.
Thank you so much.
Okay, the senators? Just so that we can have a free discussion, I'd like to go into executive session. Do I have a motion? Second. So moved, seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Okay. There are a lot of bills that we know that are coming up to us that are going to have appropriations in them. You know, we've got other things that are coming up. We've had the commission on the retirement system. We've got all of those. So unless there is a special bill that needs to be moved along quickly, I don't intend to exec some of these appropriation bills until later in the time.
We couldn't somehow get a list of all of the appropriations that it is for
You need to turn your mic on if you're going to talk. But the request was for a list of the bills, and I think LBA might be able to do that.
We're working on that now.
I think it's so important for us to see that, because it's an unprecedented number of asks for the second year of a biennium. I mean, really, an unprecedented number. And if you look at what we're given by LBA, we don't have a lot to deal with.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
There are a lot in other committees.
Oh, yeah, sure. Oh, I understand. But I think we gotta get them all. And then prioritize, obviously, what's gonna go to the top of the list. And there are also opportunities for us to look at different sources of funds where we can piece some things together. And I think the other thing is some of this stuff has to be done on an incremental basis. Because we just don't have the wherewithal to do all of it. And I talked to the treasurer today about our interest income. And our interest income is greater than had been anticipated when she gave the last number. So there will be a little more money. But that interest income will disappear in another year, because all of that's being gained off the American Recovery money, basically. And we still have a surplus for the current year. But I looked at the numbers today. I looked at the focus today, and I don't like what's happening in the highway department. I looked at the monies from the sales of property. We're like 13 million below estimates for this month. So we're moving in a negative southerly direction, to be honest. So we should look at everything we have and then make.
I'm worried about rooms and meals too. I know business in Portsmouth is down. Hotels didn't meet their targets for '23 by about 10%. So, yeah.
I think we've got to be diligent in what we do and fund the things that we think we can fund, and indeed be creative in terms of doing that. I talked to DOT, and I look at DOT's numbers and I stretch them out a bit, and I said we're going to have to be appropriating maybe 40 to 50 million a year to DOT as we move forward to keep that department ongoing, because registrations are down, licenses are down. It's gas sales are problematic. And remember, we got the TIFIA we got to pay off, and we start paying principal and interest on that shortly. And then we have the repeal of the 4 cents increase in the gas tax. That's coming. But all these things are on the horizon. So that if you put them all together and you look at what's happening to our sources of revenue, we've got to be thoughtful as we move forward. And these pressing issues, I mean, the water issue, I think the water issue has to rise to the top of the list. People, they got to survive. And the problems with the water. Now, I talked to Crowsdale in Manchester. They could produce another 1 billion gallons a day to go south. They're going to have to increase the lake, raise it by another foot, and they'll push that out. That will be 4.5 billion gallons a day will be coming out of Manchester, going south to take care of these people.
Unfortunately, the thing that you haven't mentioned is the education ruling from the Superior Court.
Right.
And anyone that'll listen in Rochester, I've told them that if it's not nailed down by either a constitutional requirement or a court settlement, that that money is subject to go into education. So certainly we do want the appeal to go forward in that, at least on my side of the fence.
Well, the two appeals. He's going to appeal the statewide property tax, and he's going to appeal the Conval suit.
Yep.
Both of those obviously imperatives that have to be dealt with.
So again, as we get closer to the end, just as we did with House Bill 2 last session, we're going to have to put all this stuff together and say, okay, this is the number we're going to spend, and then we're going to have to do make some hard decisions on what we do and what we don't do in the final thing. And we're only going to know half of the story when we do that for the Senate bills, because the House is going to send a whole bunch more stuff over. So. All right, anything? Oh, Senator.
I wanted to add one thing about cyanobacteria. I've been on the Rare Disease Council for a few years, and there is some evidence that suggests that this stuff might help cause ALS. And there was just an article published, a cluster of, I can't pronounce it, ALS in New Hampshire, a possible role for toxic cyanobacteria blooms. So, yeah, it's bad for the lakes, bad for tourism, but it's really bad for health too.
Boy, I mean, we've got to get at the source. And I appreciate the cost of replacing that septic, but damn it, that's the problem.
Excuse me, you're going to force people to replace
I don't know
their
what you
septic
do.
systems in New Hampshire?
Well, let me say this about, the things that are going on in the federal government. Rochester, because of the Cocheco River being high in nitrogen and high in phosphorus, has got a lot of different things. And now we've got to look at groundwater, okay? And groundwater, one of the things that is a possible thing is that even into these septic systems, that you have a $3,000 pre-treater, okay, that would go into these systems in addition. I mean, the state is not going to be able to afford everything, and somebody who lives on an island, and has a septic system that may be helping to pollute, it needs to be taking at least some responsibility in this as we go forward. So, again, that's all these things are going to kind of have to be taken in consideration when we make those decisions on what to send forth to the House.
Agreed.
Anything else? Yes?
So, to get back to the dairy waterworks bill, Senator Avis's bill, I would like to see the LBA reach out to DES and try to ask them how to spread out the cost over FY '25 and '26, come back with a plan, and especially since the first tranche of funding was non-general fund, I think it is incumbent on the towns who are going to benefit from this to come up with a higher percentage of the money than 1/3, if that's even in the cards, and use whether it's revolving loans or grants out of the groundwater trust fund. I think we probably all support that bill. I think as I said in the hearing, I think it's necessary. But I think, why not start right now and ask DES to put together a plan? So that's my 2 cents.
The other thing I will be suggesting on that is the line that says in dairy, and I would be looking at taking out in dairy because the rest of that sentence talks about the Southern New Hampshire Regional Water Project. And that's because this does affect a whole lot of the communities. I think that it's actually more appropriate to not single out dairy in that particular sentence. Then
that pipeline goes straight down.
We're going to have to spread it out.
Right.
Amen.
You're going to have new demands for water when Exit 4 is completed off of 93. 4A is going to open up all that land. All that land's going to have development. Right now, New Balance is building a facility there, $70 million facility. They're going to use water. They're going to have septic. There's 1,000 acres of land that's going to be developed there. 1,000 acres of land.
Well, that's what I mean. I think I think we need to do it, but I think we have to figure out a way to make it affordable. So, that's all. And I think DES could help us with that.
Anything else before I take the motion to come out of executive session? We have we have a motion to come out of executive session. We have multiple seconds. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, our business of the day being complete, we are adjourned.
Thank you, Senator. Right on time.